Alright guys, welcome back to Learnlyte. We're going to continue on with object-oriented programming in Java. And today specifically, we're going to talk about methods in Java. So, let's begin. So what are methods? Well, a method is a piece of code that is executed by the program to do a certain task, such as add two numbers or display some information to the user, etc. So a method is just basically a piece of code that we write, and that piece of code just does a specific task. So it can be add two numbers, display some information, calculate the cosine of an angle, anything, right? And you should also note that another word for method that we often use is function. So you'll see a lot of people interchange those two words because they mean one and the same thing. So when a person says a method in Java, they also mean a function in Java. And similarly, if a person says a function in Java, they're also referring to a method, right? So let's take a look at the structure of a method. So here we're going to basically dissect how a method is written in Java. So let's take a look. Here we have two methods. We have one method called myMethod right here, and we have another method called addNumbers. And let's dissect these two methods to see the structure of a method in Java. So first thing you can note is that they both begin with the keyword public. And what public means is that these two methods are public, meaning that every class in our program can see these methods. So every class in our program can see and access these methods, and that's what public means. So we can access addNumbers from any class in our program, and similarly we can access myMethod from any class in our program due to this public modifier. The next keyword you see is static. What does static mean? Well, simply put, static just tells us that this method belongs to the class and not the object. What this means is that in order for us to basically call these methods, we don't need to instantiate an object, right? That's what the static means. So we can just call the method as it is. We don't need to create an object first before we call the method. That's what the static keyword does, and we'll talk about this more in future videos. Now here you can see there's a difference now. Up here you can see for myMethod we have void, and for addNumbers we have int. So what does this mean? Well, the void keyword means that this method doesn't return anything. It doesn't have a return value. This method just basically does what it needs to do, and that's it. It doesn't return us any value. That's what void means. Versus this method now, addNumbers, has an int. What this means that the method does in fact return something after it's finished executing. It returns an integer. That's why we have return x plus y here. So when myMethod is finished being executed, it doesn't return us anything. It just moves on. But when addNumbers has finished executed, it returns us a value, and that value is a integer. And that's why we have this difference right here. You can also note that in myMethod, the parentheses right here, or should I say the brackets, is empty, right? So the parentheses is empty. That means that this method doesn't need, or this function doesn't need any parameters to basically operate. So it can just run as it is. While addNumbers, now you can see inside the parentheses we have int x and int y. What this means is that in order for addNumbers to run properly, it needs two integers. It needs a x integer and a y integer. So for addNumbers to work properly, we need to provide it with two values, and these values must be integers. If we do not provide these two values, then addNumbers will not work properly and we will get an error. But for myMethod, since we didn't specify any parameters inside of this parentheses right here, what we're basically telling Java is that this method don't need any additional information in order to run. So let's take a look at the two methods inside of our IDE. Okay, so here we have myMethod right here, and we have the addNumber method right here inside of this class called Java methods. And we also have one more method called the public method. So as you can see, my bad, we have one more method called the main method. So as you can see, the main method is also public, it is static, and it doesn't return anything because we have the void keyword right here. Okay, so we have three methods right here. So we have this main method. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna call the my method up here instead of this main method right here. Because in most cases when you're working in Java, most Java programs begin with a main method because that is the first method that is executed when you're running your Java program. So most Java programs have a main method because that is the first method that is always executed in a Java program. So right here in our main method, we're gonna call our my method so that it can be executed. So to call the method, we simply type out its name, followed by open and close parentheses and semicolon. And just like that, we have called the my method. So if we go ahead and click run, you can see that it does in fact display the information to us. This is a method which corresponds to this piece of code right here. So as you can see, when we call a method, the code that is within the curly brackets is what gets executed. So when we call my method, it is the code that is within these two curly brackets right here that gets executed. And all this code is saying is just print out to the user, this is a method. Now for add numbers now, let's call that one. We can see where, as I stated before, this void keyword means that my method doesn't return anything. But this int keyword right here tells us that add numbers does in fact return a value, and that value is an integer. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a variable called sum, and sum is gonna be equal to add numbers, right? So sum is gonna be an integer. And for add numbers to work, remember we said before, because we had int x right here and int y right here, we're basically saying that in order for add numbers to work, we need to provide two integer values, a x integer value and a y integer value. So in this case, my x is gonna be 5 and my y is gonna be 7. Okay, then we finish with a semicolon. And then what I'm gonna do inside of the main method, since we're storing the value of add numbers, we're gonna store the value returned from add numbers in this variable sum. All I'm going to do, I'm going to say system.out.print, and what I'm going to print out to the user, I'm going to print out the sum followed by the semicolon, and that's it. Hit save, and when we click run, what do we get? We get 12, because in fact 7 plus 5 is 12. And if I were to come up here and I change 5 to 7, go ahead, save, and we hit run, I will get 14 because 7 plus 7 is 14. So let's take the time to write another method. So this time I'm gonna write a method that basically divides two numbers, right? So instead of adding two numbers, it's gonna divide two numbers. And I'm gonna say public, which means that this method is accessible from any other class in our program. Static, this just means it belongs to the class and not the object. Now, do we want this method to return something? Well, since we'll be doing division, we know that sometimes when we divide numbers, we end up with remainders, and these remainders correspond to these remainders correspond to decimal values. So in this case, I do believe that our method should return something to us, and I believe what it should return to us is a float, because not all integer, when you divide integers, you're not always going to get back an integer as a value. You may get back a decimal, which is going to be a fraction, which is going to be represented by a float. So in this case, we want our function to return a float. Now we need a name for our function, and the name for our function is going to be divide. I'm going to call it divide. I spelled divide wrong. divide numbers. Okay, so that's the name of our function, followed by parentheses and open and close curly brackets. All right, so what else do we need? So in order for our function to work, we're gonna divide two numbers. So again, we're gonna provide two integer values. We're gonna provide x. Let's provide n for numerator and d for denominator. So we need two integer values, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna return. The return just basically means return this value back. So after the function gets executed, return says give back this value to whoever called the function and end the execution of that function right then and there. So we're gonna say return n divided by d. All right, and then down here, let's change this variable name from sum to quotient. And the function we're gonna call is not add numbers, but divide numbers. Let's see. And quotient is not an integer, quotient needs to be a float. Okay, and we're gonna divide 7 by 7, and we're gonna print out not sum, but quotient. Right. And I'm gonna hit save, and then we're gonna click run. So 7 divided by 7 is gonna be 1, and we have 1.0 because it is returning us a float, and we know a float is a decimal value. So let's do something different. Let's say 7 divided by 3. That's definitely gonna return a decimal. So when we hit run, 7 divided by 3 gives us 2.0. Should have a remainder. Hold on. Perhaps float is not the best. Perhaps we should use double. I believe double should be a better. Yes. So let's go ahead and right here. Let's change this to a double as well. All right, and let's hit save. And let's run that again. And we do in fact get 2.0. Alright, let's try another one. Let's say 7, no. Let's say 31 divided by 3. And we're gonna go ahead and hit run. We get 10. It's leaving off the decimal. Okay, I think I figured it out. I just remember why it's keep cutting off the decimal. So it's because we are dividing integers. So let's divide floats or doubles in this case. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna provide two numbers to the divide numbers, but they're gonna be of type double. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save, and we click run. We do in fact get our decimal value. So that's the reason why it was always chopping off the decimal value before, because we were saying divide these numbers, but the numbers we're dividing are integers. So it makes sense that whatever computation that happens on integers, when we return that value, it's gonna be a integer. So now we're doing computation on doubles, so the value being returned after the computation is gonna be double. So just bear that in mind. So let's go back and have 7 divided by 3. Let's go ahead and hit run. And we do in fact get our decimal value, which is 2.3, which we do expect. Alright, and that has been your introduction to methods in Java. I hope you learned a lot. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more videos. And once again, hit that notification bell so that you won't miss future videos. And once again, thank you for watching.